What is the latest on number 9s for Manchester United? Because there's an awful lot going on there, and we know that the club are desperately looking for one.
Yeah, number 9 is the next priority, and obviously outgoings will inform what kind of budget they can generate. So getting the Rashford wage off the books, even though it's only a loan to Barcelona. Garnacho is the so-called pure profit. You would think that if they can get 50, 60 million for him, they will be able to move quite freely in the market, because remember, the Cunha fee is in 3 payments, and the first is on this financial year, not the last one, and therefore they will still have a little bit of budget, but not necessarily 100 million euros, which is why, despite inquiring on Hugo Ekitike earlier in the window, they were not able to proceed with that to any serious degree, plus the fact that the player only wanted Liverpool. We've heard a lot of reports in the last 24 hours about Victor Gyökeres. It's true, there is appreciation from Ruben Amorim, but naturally that one financially is tough to pull off, and the player at the moment only wants Arsenal. And Manchester United sources deny that they have a place to bid or plan to. So this is very much about Sporting offering the player to Manchester United to create a bit of competitive tension. So when you kind of cut through all of the smoke or ignore all of the noise, you're left more with an internal discussion at Manchester United rather than club-to-club talks for a number 9 at the moment anyway. And there's a few names that leap out. Benjamin Šeško, for me, is the one to watch, simply because the price for Šeško may drop as we get into late July or early August, because a lot of clubs looking for strikers will have found one, and there's less perhaps of a bidding war. And Leipzig know that the player wants to leave. And 12 months ago, Manchester United, along with Arsenal and Chelsea, made a pitch for Šeško. So he's a long-standing target. And now you've got Chris Vivell, who's the director of recruitment and effectively the number 2 to Jason Wilcox. And he knows Šeško from his own time at the Red Bull Group. So I think at the right price, that's a deal that Manchester United would like to do. But Arsenal struggled to drive his release clause, which is over 80 million euros, down. And that's why if Šeško is to develop with Manchester United, there may be some patience in talks or negotiations required. A lot of talk about Nicholas Jackson. My understanding there is that Manchester United at the moment have no plans to bid. And that's partially because Chelsea's asking price is quite high. If that was to change, I think Chelsea might have to escalate their own pursuit in Alejandro Garnacho, and then maybe there's some mutual business to be done. But all signs as of now are that Manchester United don't think Nicholas Jackson is feasible. Ollie Watkins could be another name to watch. And then later in the window, if they can't find somebody, I think your point about could Mbeumo or Cunha play as a 9? Well, yes. And then you've got the more market opportunities to keep half an eye on. I don't think these are priorities now, but Dominic Calvert-Lewin's a free transfer and has offered himself to Manchester United. Nothing really mutual at this stage. And Alexander Mitrovic is another name that I keep hearing. If Al Hilal sign a striker, then they'll want Mitrovic to leave, and there might be a late window opportunity for a loan with some wage coverage that suits all parties. Again, I think it falls into the Calvert-Lewin category, where if they can't get feasibly the other targets that I mentioned, they'll pivot and see where the market opportunities arise later in the window. And Mitrovic could also be a name, therefore, to watch.
Ben, just before we let you go, because I know you're a very, very busy man, it is transfer season. The goalkeeper and central midfielder situations at Manchester United, though, because away from the number 9, we do know that those are the other 2 priority areas.
Yeah, exactly. I think another midfielder could come in. Ruben Amorim is very keen on these sort of engine room type midfielders. I still expect Kobbie Mainoo to stay at the club. I think the player wants to find a way to get a new deal over the line. Manuel Ugarte is seemingly the right kind of profile, but Ruben Amorim has to get consistency out of him. Casemiro is maybe a player, despite the fact he remains well contracted, that Manchester United would be prepared to take off the books, especially the wage. We've constantly heard about Saudi links, but nothing is developing at the moment. So maybe an outgoing is needed there. But if they can bring in another midfielder, it's a possibility. I don't think it's necessarily the number 1 or even the number 2 priority at this stage. But with an outgoing, that situation may change. They've held some talks with the camp of Wilfred and Didi to see whether there's like a budget option. He's got a relegation release clause of 9 million, and yet nothing is necessarily developing yet. And it's more perhaps the player side pushing Manchester United as a possibility than the other way around. But I think if they add a midfielder, they might have to look at more of a budget type option and a squad player. And that's where they've also had some discussions about Frank Onyeka as well, who maybe Brentford will sanction an exit for. But I know Keith Andrews actually has been quite impressed by the player in these early days of pre-season, even though under Thomas Frank, he was maybe surplus to requirements. And remember too, because Christian Norgard has left for Arsenal, that might change the thinking of Brentford somewhat. With the goalkeeper situation, it's still under discussion. Do they stick to their original plan, which was to sign a young number 2 with the expectation that Bayindir would depart, or do they feel they need a number 1? And Onana's injury could influence things, even though some say he'll only be out for 4 weeks. Others say it might be closer to 6 to 8 with a hamstring injury. And then the bigger picture, if they go for a number 1, is they have to tell Onana you're surplus to requirements, and that hasn't happened yet. So even though he's injured at the moment and there's a lot of speculation, Onana's working on the premise that he's safe at Manchester United and he is the number 1 goalkeeper. So on the one hand, you have this courting of Manchester United by Emi Martinez, and it's not impossible that Manchester United will try something there, but it is very much Martinez pushing that narrative and Manchester United listening rather than moving. And then if they stick to that first plan, Sene Lammens, the young Antwerp goalkeeper, is one possibility. I know they've looked at Victor John as well, but Lammens is the one that they've started initial talks with. And if they get that number 2, then it will be Manchester United just ignoring everything about how they need to replace Onana and only finding a young goalkeeper that's prepared to be patient, compete with Onana, but not start as the number 1 right away. And my sense at the moment is that Villa are going to make an Emi Martinez exit difficult anyway, because they sold their women's team to their parent company. They feel PSR compliant. We're into a new financial year. He's well contracted. Emi Martinez might be £35 million or more. And I don't think Manchester United would entertain that. So it wouldn't surprise me if we hear a lot of talk about Emi Martinez, and then whilst all of that noise happens behind the scenes, they stick to their strategy, which is to find a young number 2.
It feels like it's a bit of a mess in a way, because you're having to wait for something to happen, for something else to happen, for something else to happen. You mentioned that they're going to prioritise the 9 earlier, but then the 9 might take a while because of, so it feels like they're going to have to wait for something to drop, for something else to drop, and that includes the outgoings as well. So is there a danger that United could run out of time? I'll just ask it outright.
No, I don't think so. We're very early in the window. I think fans are conscious of time because every time one signing comes in, you immediately want the next one. And the market requires you to wait and be patient. So if time appears to be ticking away, that doesn't necessarily mean inaction. It can be because you're waiting for the price to drop. Maybe you have to respect the club that are selling. Perhaps they are occupied with other things. Maybe the player is still on holiday. So doing nothing in the market isn't always inaction. It can be a tactic. And I would say that if it's Emi Martinez, the price will only drop later in the window. The same for Liverpool and Mark Gahey. If they are to add a number 9, they'll need to bring in more funds. And it's normal that they won't be reckless and they'll stay disciplined. They'll see what they can manage and they'll walk away from deals if people continue to charge them a Manchester United tax. So it has felt like other clubs have been quicker than Manchester United, and it does feel they've got a lot to do between now and when the window closes. But 5 weeks or so is a long, long time in a transfer window. And I don't think we can speak of time running out until perhaps we get to the first game of the Premier League season. And if they're exactly where they are now, when they kick off the Premier League season, then yes, they'll have a lot to do and time will be running out. But now I would imagine that Jason Wilcox and his team are quite calm about the situation.